Welcome back to topic 6. In this session we will focus on models of decision making. This is the rational model. This model is useful for explaining and predicting behaviour. It is the model most familiar to us. We tend to rely on the rational model to make sense of decisions. A rational, goal-directed approach was the most effective way to search for solutions to problems. Setting goals clears ambiguity and increases the decision maker's chance of success. The modern rational choice model introduces the element of self-interest, which seeks to explain the inconsistencies between the rational goal of the organisation and the individual interests of the actor. The notion of self-interest acknowledges that rationality is just one of the many influences on decision-making processes. The first phase of the rational model is the pre-analysis phase, where situations are defined. Then there is the analytic phase, where situations that affect goals are perceived and information about them is gathered. The next phase is the design phase, where options are crystallised to deal with the situation. Then there is the choice phase, during which alternatives are evaluated and the optimal choice is selected. Finally, there is the implementation phase, where that alternative that is chosen to meet the specific situation is then implemented. In the rational model, the phases for decision making are performed deliberately and consciously, relying on the rationality of the decision maker's thoughts and behaviours. The rational model is proposed as the classical and dominant orientation to decision making. This model assumes human purposeness both in individual behaviour and in the broader scope issues, such as those found in organisations. It assumes that individuals and groups behave rationally in decision making and when taking other actions. To behave rationally generally is understood to mean that people try to maximise the value they receive in any situation. That is, they make a value maximisation choice. There actually are several variations on the theme of rationality. The classic economic man argument suggests that people consider all available alternatives and then make choices that maximise the value they receive. Simon, in his classic administrative behaviour, argued that real people cannot quite handle all of the information that is available and that they do not have the decision-making prowess required to fit the assumptions of the economic man. Simon suggested that as humans we have cognitive limitations because we cannot deal with all of the possible aspects of a problem or process all that information that might be available. We might choose to tackle meaningful subsets thereof and make decisions that might not maximise value, but are at least satisfactory. In seeking a rational decision, you just are limited in your capacity to achieve a decision in all cases. Included in the rational model are the assumptions that decisions are orderly, intentional, purposeful, deliberate, consistent, responsible, accountable, explainable, and rational. In a competitive world, the decision model characterised by rational calculation of costs and benefits of various alternatives. There are criticisms of this approach. Firstly, values and feelings also play an important role in decision making. Habits, moral feelings and values that have nothing to do with rationality may guide our behaviour. Emotions and their regulation play a central role in traders' decision making. Some criticise the rational approach for its disregard of a holistic picture of human nature, which would include culture. And finally, assuming consistency, intentionality, purposefulness and rationality on the part of individuals invariably leads to misunderstanding and possibly false assumptions. Next we have the organisational process model. The organisational process model explains the logic of action. It includes the possibility of multiple agents in the decision-making process. Under this model, decision makers are constrained by standard operating procedures that tend to make decision outcomes somewhat predictable. From the perspective of this model, the organisation is the pattern of communication and relationships in a group that provide each member with information and assumptions, goals and attitudes that enter into his or her decisions. Individual organisational members develop standard ways of reacting to situations they confront. The organisation's influence on decision making is exercised by dividing tasks amongst its members, establishing standard practices, transmitting objectives throughout the organisation, providing channels of communication that run in all directions, and training and indoctrinating its members with the knowledge, skills and values of the organisation. Decisions are dependent on small incremental choices made in response to short-term conditions. Decision making is controlled infinitely more by events and circumstances than by the will of those in policy making positions. The analysis of alternatives for action and the choice of values and goals that inform the decision become so intertwined that they are indistinguishable. The characteristics of organisations under the organisational process model include 1. Individuals must be organised in a structured way to achieve an objective. 2. Organisations create capabilities for performing tasks that otherwise would be impossible. 3. Existing organisations and programmes constrain behaviour. 4. An organisational culture emerges that shapes the behaviour of individuals within organisations. And 5. Organisations form a sort of technology in which groups of individuals work together in developing procedures to complete designated tasks. There are some criticisms of the organisational process model. Firstly, decision makers are prevented from forecasting the future and acting on the basis of a predetermined vision. Decision makers are forced to make incremental changes on a standard operating procedure. And organisations create their own institutionalised rationality. Within the garbage can model, organisations are viewed as having a collection of choice opportunities, solutions looking for problems, and participants looking for work. Choice opportunities are occasions when organisations are expected to produce decisions. Participants are characterised in terms of the energy they have available for problem solving. Problems are characterised by how much energy will be required to make a choice. Solutions recognise the potential energy that is necessary to solve a problem. Within this model, decision processes are affected by the timing of problems, solutions, participants and choice opportunities, all of which are assumed to be independent. The choice opportunity is viewed as the garbage can in which the participants dump problems, solutions and energy. Once the garbage can is full, or once all of the alternatives associated with it have been exhausted, it is removed from the decision-making process. There are also criticisms of this model. Managers may simply generate actions that will make them look good or protect them from looking bad. Judgmental, bargaining and analytical approaches were used to evaluate alternatives. Judgment was evidenced by decision makers in applying their intuition to select amongst courses of action without explaining the reason or the rationale. Bargaining was said to occur when parties to the decision negotiated to reach an agreement, and analysis was used to produce factual evaluation. The next concept we are going to consider is groupthink. Before we explore this further, it is first useful to consider who should be involved in decision making. Authoritative decisions are those an individual makes alone or on behalf of a group. Consultative decisions also are decisions an individual makes, but in this case they are made after seeking input from or consulting with members of the group. Group decisions are those all members of the group make, ideally through consensus. When we involve the group in decision making, this has its advantages. Involving many people in the process may result in a better decision. More people will have had the opportunity to think of the pros and cons, and more people will be more likely to support a decision in which they have been involved. However, there are also disadvantages to this approach. Involving many may also sacrifice efficiency, given that the more people who are involved, the more time consumed the decision-making process becomes. And in group decision-making, the process is slower than if an individual were to make the decision. So what is groupthink? It is a mode of thinking that occurs when people are deeply involved in a cohesive group and their desire for unanimity offsets their motivation to appraise alternative courses of action. The individual's mental efficiency, reality testing and moral judgment deteriorate as a result of group pressures. Groupthink is a mental effort among group members to maintain emotional equanimity by providing social support to each other. How do we prevent groupthink? Firstly, it requires critical thinking on the part of individuals and groups to avoid contamination of the process or goal displacement. Contamination of the process or goal displacement is encountered when the cohesion of the group overcomes the process for decision making or the goal for assignment. Now you have a knowledge of different decision making models, please complete any learning activities before moving on to the next video lecture.